Stump.
You're listening to 1232, an audio epic, produced by Rumblestump Entertainment. Chapter 16. While the Resistance celebrated their minor successes, gaining arms and horses, their enemy achieved a victory of her own. In the rain, the Castle Brecon drawbridge yawned open like a set of jaws, and from its throat rode the Enchantress and her escort. Zorreale rode her stunning Andalusian stallion. Her silken black cloak flew about her like mist. Armed with her heavy falchion strapped to her back, she rode with no saddle and only a light chain around the horse's neck. Captain Rhaegar, her knight, rode a charger as red as flame. He wore only a simple chainmail jerkin with no helm to prove his valor, for Zorreale accused him of cowardice if he arrayed for battle like a knight against peasants with sticks and pebbles. A company of his black riders followed behind. As they passed through the castle gate, she turned to him.
The hunt will be a great pleasure for me, Capitan, though perhaps not the sport you thirst for.
She spurred her stallion into a gallop. They rode for the town, swarming like hornets from a nest. All day they had been sending men to find the rebels that earlier had snuck into the courtyard and set fire to the barracks and stable. None of the patrols had returned, though Rhaegar expected them to be gone for at least a day. But they rode into Brecon for another errand. Clattering across the bridge, they stormed into the town square and stopped in front of the blacksmith's house. Rhaegar rode his charger up to the door and beat on it with the hilt of his sword. It was massively built, and not one to be lightly challenged on the field of battle.
Open up! In the name of your queen, Zorreale!
He growled, motioning to his men with a nod of his head. They dismounted and busted down the shabby hut door, dragged the blacksmith and his wife out of the house, and threw them in the mud before Zorreale's horse. Her gaze, so dismissive and cruel, could have easily been the stare of a deadly serpent.
Several of my men have complained of poor shoeing of our remuda. You forged the shoes. You owe me a debt. I do not tolerate careless work, my good farrier.
Rhaegar's red horse pranced under him as he waited, a crooked smile revealing his yellowing teeth, his sword still drawn. He was thirsty for the inevitable.
Please, be lenient, my lady. I will pay thee all. I only need the time. Allow me to correct my mistakes.
The blacksmith was a lean, hard-working man. His reputation for being trustworthy had made room for him to use diplomacy. This tactic had pacified her in the past. By now, a good number of the townspeople had cautiously gathered. The blacksmith was kneeling in the mud, his mind racing. He had not been called to shoe the horses in the keep for some time. He realized his secret work, helping the Resistance, had been revealed. This was the end. He locked eyes with his wife, who was now being held by two black riders. He straightened his posture and turned his gaze to search Zorreale's face.
Yes, you will pay. You will pay now,
she said, undisturbed by the farrier's pleading look.
Rhaegar, take it out of his flesh.
Rhaegar turned his charger and came closer to the farrier, ignoring the screaming pleas of the man's wife. Casually, he raised and swung his sword down by his side, the way a polo player swings a mallet, cleanly severing the blacksmith's head from his body. Rhaegar's eyes followed the tip of his sword as he swung it behind him and stopped it in the air. He then leaned down and wiped the blood off on the headless body.
You're right. Not much sport.
He sneered to his queen. Zorreale slowly turned her horse in a wide circle, looking every bystander in the eye. This was her way of gloating. On cue, her horse rose slightly on his hind legs, slowly, like a dancer.
Anyone else aiding the rebels will see the same done to them. My word is my bond. My sword is my will.
Her horse's front feet touched the ground as the blacksmith's house and barn became enveloped in black smoke. Before wheeling her horse away, she raised her hand and snapped her fingers. Even in the rain, it burst into flames. Zorreale and her escort rode away, leaving the trembling townspeople to deal with the destruction in her wake. It had almost been too easy to take this village and county. Both Zorreale and Rhaegar lusted after power and authority. The Enchantress, intoxicated by her own success, now only needed to know the Carol Stone's secret. Real quick, let's hear a word from our awesome sponsors who make this show possible. Then, we'll get back to the episode.
This episode of 1232 is sponsored in part by Oasis Family Media and its family of companies including Oasis Audio, Enclave Publishing, and Sky Turtle Press. Publishers of the forthcoming epic Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen, rendered in modern prose by Rebecca K. Reynolds and illustrated by Justin Gerard. For more information, visit fairyqueen.com. That's fairyqueen.com, or find the link in the description below.
Hello, 1232 listeners. This is Callie Sue, and I'm excited to tell you about Dramify, the ultimate platform for creators and fans of audio dramas. With oodles of genres, hundreds of shows, and thousands of episodes, Dramify is your go-to streaming service exclusively for family-friendly audio dramas. Whether you're a devoted listener or a creator of a family-friendly masterpiece, Dramify has something for you. And guess what, 1232 listeners? You can now enjoy 1232 on Dramify. Just go to dramify.com/1232. That's DRAMAFY.com/1232 and get started for free. Happy listening. And now, back to the show. Karen bolted her door behind her and buried her face in her hands. After what she had just seen, she knew time was short. Bitter tears ran down her face, but she did not sob.
David, help me. We must leave now.
Her hands trembled ever so slightly, but her voice was strong as she gathered a few supplies from around the hut. David cried. Karen stopped and knelt in front of him, her own face wet with tears. His jagged breaths became irregular, and his little face contorted in childish fear. She couldn't summon the courage she knew he needed, so she said the first thing that came to her mind.
Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go.
There was a long pause.
Are the Black Riders coming to get us?
David asked, as he tried to get control of his tears. Karen looked him in the eye. She couldn't lie to him.
Yes.
A violent knock on the door startled them both. Karen shoved David under the table as the knocking continued. The weak door latch was giving way. Her heart pounded. She drew her dagger and crouched, ready for whatever would come through the door. A couple more blows on the rickety wooden door, and then a loud crack of thunder, and it swung open. Rain poured in. In the deepening coolness of Castle Brecken's halls, the dampness of the rainy weather clung to the stones and dripped down the wall, creating foul puddles of muddy water on the floor. She waited in the old hall, with only arrow slits for light, and a single candelabra standing alone on the long banquet table. It was quiet, in contrast to the disarrayed music in Zorreale's mind. Poised with artistic synchronicity, each footfall was timed with her thoughts, as if the room were filled with flamenco music. Many years ago, she had chosen brokenness, accused her friends of betrayal, and dove headlong into a dark addiction to power and self-intoxication. Only a young girl. She had experienced defining trials and hardships unique only to her that shaped the woman who paced now, her thoughts burning, her fingers snapping in rhythm. Any threat, of any size, never failed to drive her to a demonic frenzy concealed under her tranquil demeanor. Cardigan's escape and the blacksmith's refusal to confess had triggered an inner tantrum. Like the mighty dry winds that came from the Barbary coast, Zorreale's wrath would sweep across her enemies. In the pale light, her eyes glowed angrily. They flashed as she heard someone coming. She jerked still, facing the broad doorway, standing in front of her throne. When she was certain the footsteps were coming her way, she lowered herself into the seat and sat erect. A deathly thin woman appeared, frightened and bewildered. She scurried to Zorreale's feet and dropped reverently. She was disheveled and dirty. Her once regal clothes were rags that hung limply off her bony body. Rhaegar entered behind her, carrying a torch. He approached and stood in front of Zorreale, his own eyes glinting in the light. He was standing his full height, his shoulders back, as the thin little woman whimpered on the floor. Zorreale raised her gaze and locked eyes with him. For a long moment, they stared each other down. Rhaegar had an equal appetite for power. He was older than she was by a good 10 years, but he was attracted to ambition and younger women. Yet, these two were in constant play for power. Zorreale showed only by her eyes that she was livid. She slowly rose, her gaze still locked on Rhaegar. In a singular motion, she slid her hand to the long knife that hung on her belt. Rhaegar, once again, chose to submit. He kept looking her in the eye, even as he bent one knee, bowing as slowly as she was rising, his own hand finding the hilt of his broadsword. When his knee hit the floor, an impish grin came to Zorreale's mouth and clung there, as though it didn't belong on such a cold, stone-like face.
Cuéntame todo.
She said abruptly in her native tongue, as if ordering it from someone across the room. She sat back down as the trembling woman, known as Vera, began shakily to deliver her message. She crawled up to the throne and whispered into Zorreale's ear.
Begone, wretch.
She backhanded the feeble messenger and sent her rolling into Rhaegar, who kicked her away from him. Vera ran, scrambling through the doorway. The sound of her footsteps faded away in the dead air as she descended the stairs and into the night.
My dear Rhaegar, it would seem I have a new errand for you.
Zorreale stood and descended the low dais, taking Rhaegar's arm before continuing. Her voice was syrupy with sarcasm.
Send your riders back to the town tonight, to the miller's wife. Bring her back here alive. I will leave the details in your charge. Just bring me the woman.
She gently pushed him away with a flirtatious toss of her head. Rhaegar was far from stoic. As always, her tempting and teasing heightened the tension between them. His face showed it. But he nodded his head and quickly turned and walked out, leaving the black sorceress once again alone in the darkness. With the death of John Thatcher, she intended to wipe out the resistance altogether, but now, with Cardigan's escape, more trouble was brewing, which would delay her quest to discover the Carol Stone's true power. For now, she knew it acted like a gateway, but the exact source eluded her. Zorreale had come to the Isles at the beckoning of her inner spirits, who promised increased strength if she studied with the Welsh pagan priestesses. She heard rumors that whoever held all the Carol Stones would rule the two realms, spiritual and earthly. Falling into disagreement with her tutors, she pursued her own path and came across an equally ambitious ruffian, Rhaegar. He was easily influenced by her mastery of the spirit realm and controlled by the only spell any woman ever needed for weak men, beauty. Cardigan could not be allowed to restore the kingdom. She could not afford to lose this battle. Hey, psst, real quick. Let's hear a word from our awesome sponsors who make this show possible. Then, we'll get back to the episode.
1232 is brought to you by Rumble Stump Entertainment, owned and operated by me, Jet, and my wife, Callie Sue. We love what we do, but each of these episodes requires a ton of work. Although they're awesomely fun to create, each one requires about 300 hours of work from us and our talented team members. So, if you find what we are doing valuable, support us on patreon.com by subscribing to Rumble Stump. Link in the description below. Thank you for supporting the arts. Young and old adventurers alike should know the importance of preventing new injuries and healing old ones. That's why 1232 is sponsored by Alpha and Omega Chiropractic, serving Ruidoso, New Mexico and the surrounding area. Whether you're seeking treatment for a new or reoccurring pain or are interested in preventative care, they are ready to work with you towards a healthier and happier you. Visit alphaandomegachiropractic.com for more information and schedule an appointment today. That's alphaandomegachiropractic.com.
Let's see. Where did we leave off? Hours later, Karin's hut sat empty as evening came on. No one had been there since Rhaegar and his men had left it in shambles. Beyond the town, Karin, Dafydd, and Priest Michael trekked their way through the dense forest. They knew that the hunting party was not far behind them, and time was precious. No words were spoken. The only thing on their minds was escaping. Hooded and cloaked, the rain kept coming down as the travelers struggled on.
The left horse is beyond this hillock. It won't be long now.
The priest stooped to take the child from Karin, and as he did so, he could feel her trembling.
The Lord is our shepherd,
He assured her.
I know, Father, I know.
She replied, still shivering. From out of the thick fog came a familiar figure, the stray hound. The priest paused, concerned, gripping his staff, when Karin stopped to pet the creature, calling to it to follow.
Come, we must keep moving. We cannot stop.
He said, turning to go at an even quicker pace. Several strides ahead, he knew he heard something. Another moment, and they heard it again. Hunting dogs. Rhaegar was close.
Come quickly, Karen.
The priest said as he ran a few paces, but he heard no response. Turning to search the mist, he saw no one behind him. Transfixed, like prey, he waited for a sound. Baying hounds, horses' hoofbeats, men shouting, and finally, a woman crying out. "Go!" she screamed. Knowing the words were meant for him and the boy, he still could not run. A small breeze cleared the billowing mist. Less than 100 yards away, he could see Karin had been seized by the men, their dogs gathered around her. There was no hope of rescuing her alone, and less hope for the boy if he tried.
Search for others!
Rhaegar commanded, and the mist closed over them. The priest turned and ran. You've been listening to episode 16 of 1232, produced by Rumblestump Entertainment. Written by Callie Sue and Cheyenne Bell. Narrated by Callie Sue. Today's voice talents include Jessica King as Zorreale, Jonathan Cook as Rhaegar, Sherry Evans as Karin, Kanan Landry as Dafydd, and Sid Goodlow as Priest Michael. This episode was mixed and engineered by Jet Black, with editing and sound design by Casey Caballero Sounds. Music by Callie Sue and Jet Black. This episode was made possible by our generous and incredible supporters through Kickstarter. You know who you are. To our knights, our bards, our Welsh bowmen, wizards and chieftains, thank you. Continue the adventure in episode 17.